Hello and welcome to a special edition of the Gomes Times. I am your host, Shariar Qayyum. Today we're going to be talking to you about different sides of a debate spanning several weeks regarding the replacement of rock salt with ethylene glycol. We'll be covering the points of view made by the community representatives who are staunchly against this replacement, as well as the points of view made by the government scientists and industry scientists who are for the replacement. We have several expert panelists today who will be discussing different aspects of the debate going on. As for the community, they're against ethylene glycol replacing rock salt because they believe it's dangerous to the kids. Ethylene glycol is known to be a toxic agent and has been classified as so by the CDC, which is the Central for Disease Control in the United States of America. Today, our expert panelists are Mohammed Halawi, our environmental and health expert, Sandiva Swaminathan, our regulations expert, Royce John Louis, our implementation plan expert, and Taylor Wiedenmeyer, our financial expert. Our first panelist today is Mohammed Halawi, who will be covering the health effects. Over to you, Mohammed.
Thank you, Sher, for having me today on your show. Today I'm going to briefly address the health impacts of ethylene glycol. So contrary to popular beliefs spread by the government industry scientists, ethylene glycol can cause nausea, slurred speech, seizures, hypertension, strokes, kidney failure, liver failure, and even death.
Thank you, Mohammed, for that interesting point of view about the health effects regarding ethylene glycol. Now, let's take it over to Sandiva Swaminathan, who will be talking to you about the regulations in the United States and Canada regarding ethylene glycol. Please take over, Sandiva.
Thank you, Sharia. For the whole debate, what government representatives and industry scientists have failed to discuss, have failed to mention, are the current regulations associated with ethylene glycol and how it is perceived today. It is true that after the National Toxicology Program convened an expert panel to discuss the effects of ethylene glycol on health, it was determined that the toxicity associated with ethylene glycol is of negligible concern, but that's only for our current uses. However, the Occupational Safety and Health Association, along with the Food and Drug Administration, have determined that a concentration of 20 milliliters of ethylene glycol per liter of drinking water could cause adverse effects. Industry scientists would tell you that this amount is huge and very unlikely to occur. But then again, it was also found that just 6 milliliters of ethylene glycol per liter of drinking water could cause adverse effects over a couple of days, let's say 10 days. Is that amount still high for you? Numbers do not lie. People do. Moreover, more troublingly, is that the Environmental Protection Agency has raised the alarm because ethylene glycol is found more and more and in higher concentration in the sites that they are responsible for. And that is just from our current uses: de-icing for airplanes and antifreezing reagent for vehicles. What is going to happen when that reagent is used on a more national-wide basis for cities and so on? Do we really want to take that risk? In Canada, the Canadian Environmental Protection Act of 1999, along with the Centre for Disease Control, have identified ethylene glycol as a highly hazardous substance. All in all, just the main fact, the simple fact that ethylene glycol is mentioned by those institutions should highlight the risks that it poses. Do we really want to play with fire? Because we will get burned. And more troublingly enough is that when confronted by all those facts, but all the risks that can pose ethylene glycol, a government representative just said, we are going to deal with it after it occurs. But come on, seriously? Isn't that the main problem we've been facing so far? Dealing with things, dealing with consequences after they've actually happened? Isn't it high time that we actually think before acting? Thank you.
Thank you very much, Sandiva, about those interesting regulations that the government has failed to mention. Now we're going to be taking a little break for a word from our sponsors. After the break, we'll be joined by Royce John Louis and Taylor Wiedenmeyer to discuss the implementation plan that the government and industry have proposed, as well as the financial side of ethylene glycol. Our sponsors today that have made this show possible are the tech giants Asus and Apple. Also, Powerade, the drink that refreshes you. Another company that's made this show possible is Quaker's Crispy Minis, which, as you can see right here, are very delicious. Why don't you try some, Mohammed?
Don't mind if I do.
Nice amount of chili, right? We're also sponsored by Dollarama and Maltesers. Thank you for watching. Welcome back, and I hope you enjoyed a word from our sponsors today. Now we're going to take you over to Royce Jean-Louis, who's going to be talking to you about the implementation plan created by the government scientists and industry as well. Take it over, Royce.
All right, thank you, Shariar. I'm going to talk about the implementation of ethylene glycol. The government's proposing a pilot study right now for ethylene glycol. Now, they've handed out a flyer, but it really hasn't been any detail about what said implementation will be. Now, I'm looking at these implementations, and really they haven't touched on the size of the nozzles. Now, how big will the size of the nozzle have to be for them to spray it on the ground? Now, we don't know that yet, but that's a very important thing we have to look at, because we don't want anything big so it doesn't spray to the sidewalk and people don't get them contaminated in their face or anything like that. Another thing is, looking at this implementation, is the fact that they say they're gonna go to a small town, another town. But let's put it this way, some towns have different ecologies from the other towns. How are we supposed to know that this data representation represents the ecology of the other town? Which, in my opinion, again, it's not smart. They have said that ethylene glycol has a low half-life, right? Now, it's true ethylene glycol does have a low half-life, but however, it consumes a lot of oxygen, which can lead to eutrophication. And another problem is, when ethylene glycol is degraded, it produces greenhouse gases. Now, I'm sure you guys have heard of methane, carbon dioxide, water vapor, all of which are proven to deplete our ozone layer. Now, I don't know about you, but this past decade, 30 years from now, all we've talked about is we need to go green, we need to save the environment. Now we want to implement a system that will destroy said environment, which is a big problem. Now, they've also talked about, okay, there are bacteria that can degrade it. Okay, let's talk about the bacteria. Now, this bacteria is called Pseudomonas putida. Now, I probably messed up the thing, but I'm not Latin, I don't speak the language, but that's the bacteria they're talking about. Now, this said bacteria is shown to be opportunistic, is shown to be anaerobic bacteria, and we really don't know how that will affect the ecology of the area, which can lead to maybe being an invasive species. Now, again, I'm all for new implementation, I'm all for change, I'm all for seeing a different way to do things. However, I do not like this rush, I do not like this not well thought out plan of implementing a system in our area of Gomesville that will not work long term and may cause problems to our environment. And before I leave, I just want to let you guys know this. In the 1950s, we tried implementing something called DDT. Now, we all know what happened after. Do we want to repeat history?
Thank you, Royce, for that impactful information that shows us how the government has been lying to us and how the industry has chalked this implementation plan up to be this great thing that will save us all. Now let's go over to Muhammad Halawi, who will show you the environmental effects that nobody is talking about.
Ethylene glycol has a quick degrading time. Because of this, microbes degrading it have an increased oxygen demand, which leads to eutrophication of water bodies due to ethylene glycol runoffs, which has a great impact on biodiversity. Despite what the government and industry scientists have been saying about ethylene glycol's quick degrading time, they fail to mention that ethylene glycol's degrading time slows down drastically during the winters. This leads to accumulation in the environment. Something you should know about ethylene glycol is that it has a very sweet taste. This results in animals and even kids to eat the snow. Now, the government and industry scientists, they address this by introducing dinatonium benzoate, which is a carcinogen to help give the snow a bitter taste, stopping kids and animals from eating it. But they don't know, or that they fail to address the fact that it causes health issues in animals and kids, such as respiratory problems and skin issues. As Royce mentioned, there will be a bacteria introduced to ethylene glycol to help degrade it in the low temperatures. However, this new opportunistic bacteria can have a very negative effect on the environment due to the fact that it is an invasive species.
Thank you so much, Muhammad, for showing us the environmental effects that nobody's talking about and how the government and industry have been suppressing this information by selectively choosing their own info. Now let's go over to Taylor Wiedenmeyer, who will show us how fiscally irresponsible it is to replace rock salt with ethylene glycol.
Thank you, Shariar.
There has been an increasing attention drawn towards the financial matters of ethylene glycol and road salt. First, let's establish the basics. Road salt costs $73 a ton. Ethylene glycol costs $346 a ton. So the obvious question comes to mind: why switch to a product that costs nearly 5 times as much as the existing product? There has also been a proposed ethylene glycol water mix that will reduce the cost, but it'll still be costing roughly twice as much as the road salt. The average salt truck can hold nearly 12 to 15 tons of road salt, which is equivalent to about $1,000 per load. The proposed ethylene glycol water mix will contain roughly half the amount of raw material as the salt, but coming in at $346 a ton, it will be costing twice as much as the road salt per load. The city will also have to modify current equipment and storage to maintain the ethylene glycol and to apply it. Lastly, the city of Ottawa has currently suffered a $21.5 million deficit in the Public Works Winter Management budget in 2013. So, with the introduction of ethylene glycol, it could furthermore increase this debt, which we just simply cannot afford.
Thank you, Taylor, and the rest of our expert panelists. Now, we've presented you all the relevant information. We've shown you the financial aspects of ethylene glycol. We've shown you the regulations concerning it. We've shown you everything. We've shown you how the implementation is wrong. We've shown you the environmental effects. We've shown you the health effects. And yet, the obviously biased government and industry scientists are continuing to push for its implementation. Rock salt is not perfect. Don't let your kids eat the salt. But ethylene glycol is not a good alternative. It is the bigger of two evils here. Rock salt has obviously been used forever. It's the lesser of two evils. We need to keep using it until we find an actual alternative. You need to take a stand against these obviously biased groups and then show that you won't stand for this. Show them that no matter what happens, you will take a stand, you will protect your kids, and you will protect your future. Thank you from everyone here at the Gomes Times, and we wish you a very good night.